The explosion rocked the detention facility, sending Mira tumbling from her sleep platform onto the cold metal floor. Alarms screamed through the compound as emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing crimson. Through the transparent barrier of her cell, she watched Chronaxian guards rushing past, their chitinous exoskeletons reflecting the crimson warning lights. 6 cycles of captivity had taught Mira patience. This wasn't the first attack on the facility. Border skirmishes between human forces and the Chronaxian hegemony had intensified in recent months, but something felt different this time. The guards' movements were panicked, disorganized. Mira pressed her 6-fingered hand against the barrier, her iridescent skin shimmering with nervous energy. The pale blue markings along her arms, once vibrant symbols of her status among the Selacean scholars, had faded during her captivity. As the last surviving xenobiologist from her research vessel, the Chronaxians had kept her alive for interrogation rather than execution. Small mercies. Another explosion, closer this time. The barrier flickered momentarily before stabilizing. Myra's heart raced. Her species wasn't built for combat. The Selaceans were diplomats, scientists, explorers, but 6 cycles of interrogation had hardened something inside her. When the 3rd explosion hit and the barrier failed completely, Mira didn't hesitate. She slipped into the corridor, her bare feet silent against the floor. The atmospheric scrubbers were failing, allowing the planet's toxic air to seep inside. She had perhaps 20 minutes before her respiratory system would begin to fail without protection. The detention block was chaos, other prisoners screaming, guards barking orders in their clicking language. Mira ducked into a supply alcove as a squad rushed past. There, a breathing apparatus designed for Chronaxian physiology. Not ideal, but it might buy her time. She moved swiftly through the corridors, using her memorized mental map of the facility. The Chronaxians had underestimated her eidetic memory during her daily transfers to the interrogation chambers. Each turn brought her closer to the landing bay where supply vessels regularly docked. Mira rounded the final corner and froze. The landing bay doors had been breached, twisted metal gaped open to the harsh landscape beyond. Through the opening, she glimpsed armored figures exchanging fire with Chronaxian defenders. Humans. Their reputation was complicated. Some Selacean accounts described them as savages, others as potential allies against Chronaxian expansion. Either way, they represented her only chance. Ducking low, Mira sprinted across the exposed space toward the opening. A stray energy pulse caught her side, searing through her thin detention garment and into her flesh. She stumbled but kept moving, the acrid taste of the planet's atmosphere beginning to burn her lungs despite the makeshift breathing apparatus. Outside was chaos, human combat vehicles, Chronaxian defenders, and the hellish landscape of Outpost World D-17. Mira staggered behind a rock formation, clutching her wounded side as her vision began to blur. "Don't move," a deep voice commanded. Mira froze, slowly raising her head to face the barrel of a human weapon. Behind it stood a tall figure in combat armor, helmet visor obscuring their face. "Please," she managed in broken trade language. "Help, escape." The soldier hesitated, then glanced back toward the battle before making a decision. The helmet visor retracted, revealing a weathered human face with intense gray eyes and a grim expression. "Lieutenant Jake Wilson, 42nd Frontier Legion," he said, lowering his weapon. "You're injured." Mira nodded weakly, feeling darkness creeping at the edges of her consciousness. "This is against every protocol," Jake muttered, more to himself than to her. He reached into a compartment on his armor and produced a proper human respirator. "But I'm not leaving you for those chittering bastards." As he carefully replaced her makeshift breathing apparatus with the human equipment, Mira caught his gaze. Something passed between them, recognition of something kindred despite their alien differences. "Can you walk?" Jake asked, supporting her weight. "Yes," Mira whispered, though she wasn't certain it was true. "Then let's go," he said, making a decision that would change both their lives forever. My transport is hidden in the ridge caves. We need to move before my unit realizes I've gone off mission. With his arm around her waist, they moved into the alien landscape, away from captivity and toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the detention facility burned against the blood-red sky. The mountain cabin materialized like a mirage through the swirling dust storm. Jake's transport had failed 3 kilometers back, forcing them to continue on foot across the unforgiving terrain. Mira stumbled alongside him, her breathing growing more labored with each step despite the respirator. The makeshift bandage he'd applied to her wound was soaked through with luminescent blue fluid, Celacean blood, so different from his own. Almost there, Jake muttered, tightening his grip around her waist. Just a little further. The cabin was technically a forward observation post, one of dozens scattered across the frontier planets. Off-grid, minimally supplied, and, most importantly, off the official assignment roster. Jake had discovered it during a reconnaissance mission months ago but had kept its existence to himself. Sometimes a soldier needed a place to disappear, even if just for a few hours. Now it would serve as their sanctuary. The door hissed open at his palm print, revealing a Spartan interior, one room with basic survival equipment, a communications array, currently disabled, and a narrow cot. Jake guided Mira to the bed before securing the door against the howling storm. System, initiate environmental protocols. Adjust atmospheric composition to support Celacean physiology. He glanced at Mira. That should help once it cycles through. You can remove the respirator in about 20 minutes. Myra's large, amber eyes studied him with a mixture of wariness and gratitude. Why, help me, she asked, her trade language halting but understandable. Jake busied himself with the medkit. Good question. Probably just flushed my military career down the waste extraction unit. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Let's treat that wound before you ask me any more questions I don't have answers to. He worked methodically, cleaning and sealing the energy weapons burn using a universal healing compound. Mira watched his hands with fascination. Your species, reputation for violence, she said softly. Yet you show kindness. Jake's jaw tightened. Don't mistake one soldier's poor judgment for kindness. There are plenty of humans who'd have handed you straight back to the Chronaxians. Or worse. Then why not you? The question hung in the air between them. Jake had been asking himself the same thing since the moment he'd lowered his weapon at the detention facility. 6 years of military service, decorated twice for valor, and now risking everything for an alien refugee he didn't know. I've seen enough of this war, he finally said. Maybe I'm tired of following orders that don't make sense. Maybe I recognized something in you. He trailed off, uncomfortable with his own honesty. The atmospheric system chimed, indicating safe levels for Celacean respiration. Mira carefully removed the respirator, taking an experimental breath. Her chest rose and fell naturally for the first time since her escape. Thank you, she said, her voice clearer now. I am Mira Cavalli, xenobiological researcher. My vessel was captured by Chronaxian forces 6 cycles ago. I was, the last survivor of my research team. Jake nodded, allowing himself to truly study her now that immediate survival wasn't their only concern. Her humanoid form was both familiar and alien, slender with iridescent skin that shifted subtly between pale blue and violet. Intricate markings ran along her arms and neck, and her features were delicately structured around those remarkable amber eyes. You should rest, he said, suddenly aware of how closely he was examining her. We're safe here for now. And then? Mira asked softly. Jake ran a hand through his short brown hair. I don't know. I can't take you to the human settlement. There are standing orders to detain any non-human entities encountered in the conflict zone. You would be punished for helping me. Court-martialed at minimum, Jake confirmed. Probably imprisoned. Silence fell between them, heavy with implications. Jake moved to the cabin's small viewport, watching the dust storm rage outside. Behind him, he could hear Myra's breathing growing steadier as the medical compound took effect. "My people have a saying," she said after several minutes. "When paths cross in darkness, neither traveler walks alone." Her voice grew softer. "I have been alone for a very long time, Lieutenant Jake Wilson." Something shifted in the air between them, something fragile and unexpected. Jake turned from the viewport to find Mira watching him, vulnerability and strength impossibly combined in her gaze. "Just Jake," he said. "If we're going to be fugitives together, we might as well drop the formalities." A small smile curved Myra's lips, transforming her face. "Jake," she repeated, the name sounding musical in her accent. He settled into the chair opposite the cot, suddenly aware of his exhaustion. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out our next move." As Mira drifted toward sleep, Jake remained vigilant, his weapon close at hand. But his thoughts were far from combat protocols or military strategy. Instead, he found himself wondering about the strange twist of fate that had brought this alien woman into his life, and what it would mean for both their futures. Outside, the storm continued to rage, hiding their small sanctuary from the searching eyes of both human and Chronaxian forces. For this moment, at least, they existed in a fragile bubble of safety, two strangers from different worlds bound together by desperation and something neither was ready to name. 7 days passed in the isolated cabin. 7 days of cautious conversations, shared meals from Jake's limited supplies, and the slow building of trust between species never meant to connect. Myra's wound had healed remarkably fast, a benefit of Celisaean physiology that fascinated Jake despite his limited medical knowledge. "Your commander will be searching for you," Mira observed on the morning of the 8th day. She stood at the viewport, her silhouette outlined against the rust-colored dawn. The thin detention garment had been replaced with a thermal undersuit from Jake's supplies, modified to accommodate her slender frame. Jake looked up from the communication array he'd cautiously reactivated. Major Donovan's already sent 3 encrypted messages. The last one mentioned disciplinary action if I don't report in by tomorrow's rotation. "You should go back," Mira said softly, not turning from the viewport. "Claim you were injured in the attack. Your human physicians would find no evidence to contradict this." Jake's jaw tightened. "And leave you here? With limited supplies and no way off planet? The Chronaxians will have search parties combing every sector. I have survived worse conditions." A sad smile touched her lips as she finally turned to face him. "My captivity taught me resilience, Jake. I would not have you sacrifice your future for a temporary delay of my recapture." Jake crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just short of her. "Is that what you think this is? A delay?" Something flickered in Myra's amber eyes, hope, perhaps, or fear of hoping. "What else could it be? Our species have no formal alliances. I am, at best, a political complication for your military. At worst, an enemy combatant." "You're a scientist, not a soldier," Jake countered. "And I'm having trouble seeing you as a complication." His voice dropped lower. "At least, not the political kind." The air between them charged with unspoken tension, the same electricity that had been building with each passing day. Their conversations had grown longer, their silences more comfortable. Jake had found himself watching the graceful way she moved, fascinated by the subtle color shifts of her skin that seemed to reflect her emotions. Myra's hand lifted hesitantly before coming to rest against his chest, directly over his heart. "Your pulse accelerates when I am near," she observed. "As does mine. Is this common among humans and those not of their kind?" Jake exhaled slowly. "Not common, no. But not impossible either." Before either could speak again, the proximity alarm blared through the cabin. Jake moved instantly to the security console, his military training reasserting itself. 3 combat vehicles approaching from the south, he reported grimly. Human signatures. 42nd Legion markings. Myra's skin paled to an almost translucent blue. They have found you. Us, Jake corrected, already moving to gather essential supplies. And we're not sticking around for introductions. There's a network of caves 2 kilometers east. If we can reach them before the patrol gets a visual lock. The cabin's communication array crackled to life, cutting him off. Lieutenant Wilson, this is Major Donovan. We've tracked your emergency beacon. Respond immediately. Jake froze. Emergency beacon? I never, his eyes widened in realization. The medical compound. Some newer versions have tracking nanites. He looked at Mira with dawning horror. They tracked the treatment I gave you. Then I have led them to you, Mira whispered. I have destroyed your life. Jake made a decision in that moment, one that had perhaps been forming since he first lowered his weapon in the face of her desperation. He crossed to Mira and took her hands in his. Listen to me. There's an unmarked transport in a concealed hangar half a kilometer north. It's stocked for extended reconnaissance missions. If we can reach it. Lieutenant Wilson. The Major's voice boomed again. You have 60 seconds to respond before we breach the cabin. Any non-human entities discovered will be considered hostile and treated accordingly. Myra's fingers tightened around Jake's. They will kill me. Not while I'm breathing, Jake promised, his gray eyes fierce with determination. There's a maintenance tunnel under the floor panels. It was designed as an escape route in case the observation post was compromised. As he spoke, he was already moving the sparse furniture to reveal the hidden access point. The panel slid aside with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a narrow passage barely illuminated by emergency lighting. Go, Jake urged, pressing a small sidearm into Myra's hand. Follow the tunnel north. It will bring you within 100 meters of the hangar. Wait for me there. Myra's skin rippled with distress, the blue markings along her arms brightening with emotion. You cannot face them alone. They will execute you for treason. They'll try to take me into custody first. Military protocol. Jake's smile was grim. I'll buy you time, then follow. That's an order, scientist. Outside, the whine of approaching vehicles grew louder. Time was running out. Mira moved with sudden determination, closing the small distance between them. Her lips, surprisingly warm against his human skin, pressed against his with an intensity that stole his breath. The contact lasted mere seconds but conveyed everything words could not. Among my people, this means a promise, she whispered against his mouth. Return to me, soldier. Before Jake could respond, she slipped into the tunnel, the soft glow of her skin visible for a moment before she disappeared into the darkness. He sealed the panel behind her, rearranged the furniture, and turned to face the door just as the first pounding demands for entry began. Outside, the dust storm was rising again, nature conspiring to hide the escape of 2 fugitives whose fates had become impossibly entwined. Jake touched his fingers to his lips, still feeling the ghost of her kiss, and prepared to face his former comrades with a new purpose burning in his heart. The interrogation room was deliberately cold, a psychological tactic Jake recognized because he'd used it himself on captured Chronaxian soldiers. The irony wasn't lost on him as he sat facing Major Donovan across the metal table, his wrists bound by restraint cuffs. Let's try this again, Lieutenant, Donovan said, his voice deceptively calm. What happened to the alien entity that was treated with our medical supplies? Jake kept his expression neutral. As I've stated 4 times now, Major, I encountered an injured Celacean during the raid. I administered basic medical aid as required by Galactic Convention protocols for non-combatant species. The subject fled during a Chronaxian counterattack. And you've been missing from duty for 8 days because... I was injured in the counterattack and sought shelter at the observation post until I was well enough to return. Donovan's fist slammed against the table. Bullshit. We have footage from your helmet cam showing you deliberately separating from your unit. We have medical scans showing no evidence of injury. And we have your personal code used to access supply requisitions at the observation post consistent with supporting 2 occupants. Jake maintained his silence, calculating. 3 hours had passed since his capture. If Mira had followed his instructions, she would have reached the concealed hangar by now. The question was whether she would wait for him as ordered or attempt the escape on her own. The thought of never seeing her again created a hollow ache in his chest that surprised him with its intensity. You've got an impressive service record, Wilson, Donovan continued, changing tactics. 2 commendations for valor. Recommended for officer advancement. Why throw it all away for some alien refugee? Celasayans are Class 3 protected sentients under the Frontier Accords, Jake replied evenly. Their research vessel was illegally seized by Chronaxian forces in neutral space. The survivor was entitled to humanitarian assistance. Don't quote regulations to me, Lieutenant. I know exactly what you're doing. Donovan leaned forward. This isn't about regulations. Something happened out there between you and this alien. Something that compromised your loyalty. Jake met his commander's gaze steadily. My loyalty to what, exactly? The same command structure that's been turning a blind eye to Chronaxian expansion for years? The same high command that classifies all non-human entities as potential hostiles without verification? Careful, Wilson. That sounds dangerously close to sedition. A commotion outside the interrogation room drew both men's attention. The door slid open to reveal Lieutenant Commander Hayes, her expression tense. Sir, we've detected an unauthorized launch from the northern quadrant. Unregistered transport, no flight clearance. Jake's heart lurched. Mira had chosen not to wait. Donovan was immediately on his feet. Track and intercept. Authorization for disabling fire. No. Jake surged against his restraints. The vessel is unarmed. The pilot is a non-combatant scientist. Donovan turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. So you do know more than you've been telling us. He gestured to Hayes. Deploy the interceptors. And keep Lieutenant Wilson secured. We'll finish this conversation after we recover his alien friend. As they left, Jake strained against the restraints, desperation mounting. The observation post transport wasn't built for combat evasion. Against military interceptors, Mira wouldn't stand a chance. The minutes crawled by like hours. Jake focused on working one hand against the restraint cuff, using a technique he'd learned from a captured smuggler years ago. The pain was intense as the metal bit into his skin, but the thought of Mira facing capture, or worse, drove him forward. The door slid open again, but instead of Donovan, a young corporal entered, carrying a tablet. Sir, I'm assigned to guard duty until the major returns. Jake assessed the soldier quickly, inexperienced, nervous. An opportunity. Corporal, did they intercept the transport? The young man hesitated, then apparently decided sharing information wasn't against orders. Not yet, sir. The dust storms are interfering with tracking systems. Commander Hayes is deploying a wider search grid. Hope flickered. The storms had always been their allies. With sudden clarity, Jake realized his path forward. I need to use the sanitation facility, he said, allowing pain to edge his voice. These restraints are cutting off circulation to my hands. The corporal looked uncertain. I'm not supposed to. Look, I'm not going anywhere in a sealed military base. You can stand guard outside the door. But unless you want to explain to Major Donovan why his prisoner lost function in both hands due to improper restraint protocols, I suggest you make an exception. The appeal to regulations worked. The corporal reluctantly disabled the restraints and led Jake to a small adjacent washroom. The moment the door closed between them, Jake moved with practiced efficiency. The ventilation panel above the sanitation unit was standard military design, and shared access with 3 adjacent rooms, including the communications center. Within minutes, he had navigated the cramped ventilation system and dropped silently into the deserted communications room. The night shift was minimal, with most personnel diverted to the search operation. Jake quickly accessed the central console, fingers flying over the interface. He had one chance to reach Mira before the interceptors found her. Bypassing security protocols, he opened an encrypted channel on the frequency used by observation post transports. "Northern Light, this is Wayward Soldier," he transmitted, using the call signs they had established during their days together. "Adjust coordinates to Sector 793. Repeat, 793. Dust density will provide cover. We'll rendezvous at the coordinates." He waited, breath held, for any response. "Wayward Soldier," Myra's voice came through after an agonizing pause, distorted by interference but unmistakable. "Understood. How will you?" "Trust me," Jake interrupted, aware that each second increased the risk of detection. "Northern Light, he hesitated, knowing what he wanted to say but uncertain of the words. "I know," Myra's voice softened despite the static. "I feel it too." The connection terminated as alarms began blaring throughout the base. His unauthorized transmission had been detected. Jake moved quickly, sealing the communications room behind him and making his way toward the hangar bay. He would have minutes at most before the entire base was locked down. As he slipped through service corridors, avoiding security checkpoints, Jake's mind filled with images of Mira, her smile, the touch of her hand, the warmth of her lips against his. What had begun as an impulsive act of compassion had transformed into something he could no longer deny. Against all logic, against the barriers of species and worlds, he had found something worth risking everything for. Now he just had to survive long enough to reach her. The smuggler's vessel, Stardust Nomad, broke atmosphere with a thunderous roar, its ancient engines straining against the planet's gravitational pull. In the cramped cargo hold, Jake braced himself against a storage container, the fresh wound across his shoulder throbbing with each violent shudder of the ship. "Your human body requires medical attention," Mira observed, her voice steady despite the chaos of their escape. She knelt beside him, examining the energy weapons burn that had nearly ended his desperate flight from the military base. "I've had worse," Jake replied, though they both knew it was bravado. The military interceptors had come terrifyingly close to preventing their rendezvous at the coordinates he transmitted. Only the timely intervention of the smuggler ship, attracted by the substantial payment Jake had offered using his military credentials, had saved them from certain capture. Myra's fingers, cool against his feverish skin, applied a makeshift dressing. "You should not have risked so much," she said softly. Jake caught her hand, holding it against his chest. Was there ever really a choice? The question hung between them, weighted with everything they'd experienced since that first fateful meeting outside the Chronaxian facility. 8 days in isolation had forged a connection neither had anticipated, one that defied explanation but felt more real than anything Jake had known in years of military service. "The captain says we will reach the outer colonies in 3 rotations, Mira said, changing the subject but not withdrawing her hand. "What awaits us there?" "Uncertainty," Jake admitted. "The colonies operate outside direct military jurisdiction. Some welcome non-humans, especially those with scientific knowledge. Others." He didn't finish the thought. "And you? What awaits Lieutenant Jake Wilson, now branded a deserter and traitor?" A wry smile touched his lips. "Ex-lieutenant. And I imagine a significant bounty. We'll need to be careful." The ship lurched again as it cleared the planet's upper atmosphere, then stabilized as it entered the smooth vacuum of space. Through a small viewport, the dust-covered world that had been Jake's home for 3 years receded into the distance, along with his former life, rank, and identity. "I have been thinking," Mira said hesitantly, her skin shifting to a deeper blue that Jake had come to recognize as a sign of emotional intensity. "My people maintain secret research outposts beyond the Valerian Nebula. Places unknown to either human or Chronaxian forces. If we could reach them, your people might welcome a fugitive Selasean scientist," Jake finished for her. "But a human deserter? That's a different matter." Myra's expression grew determined. "You saved me when your own kind would have returned me to captivity. You abandoned your position, your future, everything you knew." Her hand moved to cup his face. "Among the Selasean, such actions create a bond that transcends conventional relationships. We call it ectory, souls who have found each other across impossible distances." "Ectory," Jake repeated, the alien word feeling right somehow. "It would not be easy," Mira continued. "Some would oppose your presence. But together, we could build something new. Your strategic knowledge combined with my scientific background, we could help forge understanding between our species." A future neither had imagined now stretched before them, uncertain, dangerous, but filled with possibility. Jake leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers in a gesture that had become their own private ritual during their days in hiding. "I'm not sure I know how to be anything other than a soldier anymore," he admitted. "Then we will discover it together," Mira whispered. "Just as I must learn to be more than a survivor." The cargo hold door slid open, revealing the smuggler captain, a grizzled human woman with cybernetic implants visible along her jawline. "We've cleared tracking range," she announced. "But there's chatter on military channels about a stolen transport and 2 fugitives, 1 human, 1 Selasean. Bounty's already been posted." Her augmented eye scanned them appraisingly. "Lucky for you, I don't particularly care for military authorities in this sector. Unlucky for you, I charge extra for high-risk passengers." Jake started to respond, but Mira spoke first, her trade language now flowing smoothly after days of practice with Jake. "Captain, I possess knowledge of Selasean pharmaceutical compounds that would be extremely valuable in the outer colonies. Information that would more than compensate for any additional risk to your vessel." The captain's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. "Is that so? Well then, perhaps we can come to an arrangement." She gestured for them to follow. "Come up to the main deck. No point in you two staying down here with the cargo. We've got 3 days before we reach the colony on Persephone's edge. Might as well be comfortable." As they followed the captain through the narrow corridors of the vessel, Jake felt Myra's fingers intertwine with his, 5 slender digits fitting perfectly between his 5 human fingers despite their alien differences. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. Myra's skin shimmered with a pattern he'd never seen before, a swirling mixture of blues and violets that seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. "Yes," she admitted. "But not of what lies ahead." Jake understood. The fear wasn't of the unknown future, but of how completely their separate paths had merged into one. Of how impossible it now seemed to imagine existence without the other. The main deck opened before them, a panoramic viewport revealing the vast starfield stretching into infinity. Somewhere out there lay the Valerian Nebula and beyond it, perhaps, a place they could call home. "It's beautiful," Mira breathed, her eyes reflecting the distant stars. Jake wasn't looking at the stars. "Yes," he agreed softly. "It is." The smuggler captain shot them a knowing glance before turning to the navigation controls. "Setting course for the outer colonies. Estimated arrival in 72 hours. As the ship accelerated to light speed, the stars stretched into brilliant streaks of light. Jake felt a strange peace settle over him despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. He had left behind one war only to enter another kind of battle, the fight to build something meaningful from the wreckage of their former lives. But this time, he wasn't fighting alone. Northern Light, he whispered, using the call sign that had brought them together. Myra's answering smile was radiant. Wayward Soldier, she replied, completing the circuit between them. Beyond the viewport, the universe expanded endlessly before them, a canvas of possibilities for two beings from different worlds who had defied everything to forge a path that neither could have traveled alone.